Thank you all for joining us today. This is Michelle Rich with the Iowa After School Alliance, and I'm joined here today by my colleague Crystal Hall with
Good
the Iowa
morning.
After School Alliance, and also joined by David Welter, a former principal in Cedar Falls, here to talk today about partnerships, sustaining and developing partnerships over time. So thank you for your time today. I'll hand it over to Dave as we work together to progress slides and give you some good information today. Thanks, Dave.
You bet, Michelle. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to visit with you about the importance of partnerships. And I'm going to speak to you from my experience, having started an after-school program about 17, 18 years ago, starting it with a 21st Century grant, but then realizing that after 3 years we had to come up with a plan to sustain that particular grant. And I'll just go back and talk a little bit about where we went once that grant ended. We had to come up with some local partnerships in particular to help sustain the efforts that we started at homes. And those partnerships came from a number of sources. The first thing that we did was explored some funding that we had through at-risk dollars and dropout prevention dollars from the state. And we had to mix it up a little bit with several agencies and groups as we worked through those partnerships. But our Board of Education was very supportive in helping us along those lines because the dropout prevention dollars and at-risk dollars really did sustain the majority of our program as we moved forward. That was an important piece. The other thing that we felt was very important was partnering with our school board because the school board found that through the efforts of our after school programming, our kids' achievement and attendance rates and behaviors in school improved dramatically. And we kept data on that over 16 years, which I have information in a slideshow that we have available here that we can talk about and look at. But that was critical for us as well because given the fact that we had success with student achievement and a variety of other measures that we were calculating, the school board was very supportive and said, we will provide transportation for your kids to and from school with regards to the programming that we had. And that was a critical piece because the majority of our at-risk kids that were in need of this type of assistance had no way to get to the programming both before and after school. So that was a critical piece. Following along with that, we then reached out to a number of local businesses in our community. John Deere was one in particular that was very supportive as we had a program called Makerspace where we were helping train kids through a variety of activities, which basically helped the John Deere people understand that what we were doing in the after school programming was helping develop their future workforce. And that was a critical piece as well as we went through. We worked with our Cedar Falls Rec Department to help provide some activities for kids with regards to physical recreational activities. We partnered with a number of other agencies and groups, including 4-H. We had a garden club that our kids were very excited about. In fact, that's flourishing yet at homes today. And by flourishing, I mean they've really expanded that to work with different departments within the school itself. Our garden club actually teaches kids where the food on their table comes from because they're growing it themselves. And then as they harvest it, they've worked together with our business department in coming up with a way to market that material. They've been making salsa and pizza sauce out of their tomatoes and peppers and a variety of other things that they had. They're also serving those items on the lunch line in the school. So kids are actually understanding that you don't just go to the supermarket to get the food that you're eating, and you actually know what's in the food you're eating when you grow it yourself. So that's been a real plus as well. We had a number of other partnerships that we worked with through the schools over the years. And I guess where I'm at on that is we have the University of Northern Iowa as well. Many of the schools that I'm familiar with have a college or a junior college, community college available nearby where you can actually partner and do a number of activities and programs as well. So all those things were critical in keeping the program going and sustained over the last 16 years. And honestly, it changes from year to year because kids' interests change. And one thing that we felt was very important was surveying our students at the end of each school year to find out what their interests were, not only now, but down the road, so that we could plan some programming and look for potential partnerships as well as we move forward. One story I'll share with you that was a critical piece as well. I had several at risk kids at school who were probably some of my best students if they would apply themselves. And that was the big if they would apply themselves. And what I did is I questioned them on what their interests actually were. And this came kind of at the end of the year of a survey. And their interest, of course, was video games, which was interesting because they were very sharp and intelligent kids, but were getting failing grades in school because they weren't interested. So what I did is I arranged a visit to a local video game producer. Actually, it was interesting because it was my nephew. It was called Eight Monkeys in a Lab. And he started his own business and they actually produce video games. So I rounded up these kids and took them over to this business. And what we did is sat down and looked at how the business ran. They had one room where everybody was in. Eight of the people that were co-owners in this business sat around that table. They had a graphic artist, they had an engineer, they had other people that were doing specific jobs for video gaming. And these kids were just amazed. Their eyes were popping out of their head because it was their passion, something that they loved. And we actually set them up with an internship in the summer where they could help box and package these different video games that were being produced in this setting. And I'll never forget the ride home from that visit. One of the kids, kind of the leader of the pack, said, "You know what, Mr. Welter? I'll do anything if I can be a part of making video games." I said, "Well, if you look back to what you just witnessed, you saw eight people, all with different skills that they learned in school that are using to produce these video games." And the kids just got really excited and turned on and understood that now I better pay attention in math class. I better pay attention in art. I better pay attention in these different um, classwork settings that they had. So that was, I think, a win for us in that regard, and that's been an ongoing thing. Part of our makerspace was dealing with um, tearing things apart and fixing them and making them. And again, those are things that kids were interested in, and that's what we pursued in partnerships through local communities and businesses. And that turned out to be a real plus for us as well. So it's ongoing. The program continues at homes. I've retired now, been retired for 2 years, but I've taken those lessons that I learned through that after school programming and provided quite a bit of documentation on the effect that those programs had on kids, the positive effects. And we can share the slideshow with you. Probably we'll just send it out where you can take a look at some of that data. I don't want to spend the time going through the numbers all with you now, but it's pretty obvious. What I've taken now to doing is moving on with trying to help some of our rural schools come up with some programming options similar to what we may have had in Cedar Falls during my tenure there. And we've come up with a partnership that has been an outstanding partnership with Campfire Heart of Iowa. And Bob Reed, their executive director, has been working closely with me. And we've reached out now. Bob has about 5 programs that he had going here in the central Iowa prior to me teaming up with him. And now we're working with 4 additional schools in the central Iowa region here, more rural schools setting outside of the Des Moines area. And Campfire has agreed, after doing a survey, a market survey of the area, which determined the fact that many of the rural schools here in central Iowa have a tremendous need for after school programming, both before and after, because of two working parents and their families. And with that market survey, they determined the need was there, even though a lot of these rural communities have a small program already in place to help with after school care for elementary on up through junior high kids. They don't have enough programming to support the needs of their communities. So, what Campfire has done is they've committed to offer the funding and support for these programs in these schools as long as the schools provide a space. And you can see on some of the slides that I have here, what we did is we went into these schools and talked about some of the needs that they have with regards to after school programming. And the slide that was currently up here, the invest slide, is one that's really, really powerful for me. And what it talks about is smart investments in early childhood development. And you can see from that graph that the earlier you get started in investing in kids and in programming that help them, that motivate them, that engage them, the more success you're going to have with those kids. And, that's a critical piece as you go through. So I guess the bottom line is the key words here is invest, develop, sustain, and therefore you'll gain. And that's been the economics of human potential equation that has been pretty successful in any programming that I've run over the last 16 years. The next slide talks a little bit about what impact after school programming has had at Holmes Junior High. And you'll see that from my perspective, the key factors here are that students are engaged in learning and they're receiving immediate intervention when they're not demonstrating proficiency. And to me, again, that's a very critical piece because a lot of the kids get lost along the way if you don't get that immediate intervention with them. If you're going to wait a week or two to follow up with kids that aren't getting key concepts, you're losing them. So these programs that we have in after school really provided that opportunity. Obviously, all students are not students who don't get it, but the students who do get it are drilling deeper into curricular interest areas through enrichment. And one of the things we struggled with early in our programming was the fact that a lot of kids saw the after school program as a place for kids who were struggling, only kids who were struggling. And we worked very hard to change that image by providing enrichment opportunities to allow kids to drill deeper into those interest areas they had. And that's where our partnerships were very special because John Deere came in with a number of, for example, engineers who had kids in our school setting and could actually motivate and inspire kids in the engineering area, again, which was helping Deere with their long-term development of skills for their future workforce. So that was a real plus for us as well. And I'll never forget one of the things that one of the engineers that I initially reached out to said, and they said, we'd love to come over and help, but we're scared to death of junior high kids. I said, we can help you with that. That's not an issue because we'll have people there that know the kids, that have a relationship, that can and take care of that part of it. If you'll just bring your expertise and share that, that's what we're after. The thing that also helped us with those partnerships and enrichments was the fact that attendance improved and truancy literally became a non-factor, which as a school person was a critical thing, which was to our school board was a critical thing as well. And if you look at some of the charts and data that we had collected, you can see that our data showed that we ranked first in reading comprehension, second in math, second in science scores, with students who had free and reduced lunch proficiency concerns compared to other schools our size in the state. And honestly, I'm going to give credit to that to our after school programming because we had a tremendous emphasis on literacy, on engaging activities that kids had, which got them to school. And we kind of piggybacked on that by taking the program not only before and after school, but into the middle of the school day. We established a program that we called Tiger Time. And that Tiger Time was a 30-minute block in the middle of the school day where all teachers were accessible to all students during that 30-minute block of time. And during that time frame, kids were provided the opportunity to go get the additional help that they may need in an area that they may be struggling. And believe it or not, some kids didn't want to take advantage of that. So we kind of made an incentive involved with that. We called it a yellow line possibility where kids could either go in and get the help that they needed, or if they were caught up with their work and getting a C or better in their class, they could enjoy some of the enrichment activities that we offered at the same time. And that was a motivation. I'll never forget the first week we did that. One of the students came to me and said, "Mr. Welter, I didn't get to go to Tiger Time today." And I said, "Well, why was that?" And he said, "Well, because I didn't have my homework done. And that ain't going to happen again." So that was a real motivating factor for us. And that's been an incentive that's remained. The entire district in Cedar Falls through the middle school, junior high level incorporated that model. And that's been a real plus for us, in addition to the before and after school program that was in place. So we're pretty excited about that as well. But it all comes down to relationships and partnering with different groups and agencies, including your local school districts, your churches, your businesses in your community. And the key to building those partnerships is finding interest areas of kids so that you can get them there and get them engaged. Now, one of the things that we found through our partnership with Campfire Heart of Iowa, which has been very positive, is they already had an administrative staff in place. They had a payroll staff in place. They had transportation available, and they can recruit the staff and programming needs that you have if you just provide a space for their program. And to me, that was the ideal scenario because those are so many of the things that we struggled with as a school district was finding a way to provide for those needs that we had. And Campfire has done just an excellent job in that regard. And that's the positive that we take in as we talk to these rural school areas and partnering with them through the collaborative efforts at Campfire Heart of Iowa. And I guess I'll just finish a few comments here by saying we've been working hard not only in the school district in Cedar Falls, but also through Campfire to investigate ways to promote a culture that supports a community of learners as we confront the changes we're faced with in education today, because it is changing, as all of you know. And unfortunately, not all kids experience school as a place in which they feel a sense of connection, support, and safety. And if we can show that we care about kids and students through programming such as this, it really provides a motivating, engaging factor for kids to get involved in their education and to help work and collaborate with the partners that we bring in these shared relationships. So, that's a little bit of a nutshell summary of where we're at here with partnerships today.
Thanks, Dave. I have a question for those programs that don't have a lot of data on reading improvement or science improvement. What resonates with schools and other partners if they don't have the data?
Well, the key is, I think what you'd have to do is show some examples of maybe places where that experience has been a positive one. And that's why I put together many of these presentations that I presented with through after school programming. And I have that information available, which I'll locate that and get it to you and provide that. But it comes to a key point of when you go in to seek partners for your after school programming, you have to give them a reason to buy into it. And many of the businesses in the communities are looking for a trained workforce. And by doing these programming opportunities, you're providing them fresh, new, motivated potential employees down the road. And, honestly, I'm a little bit hung up with the fact that many times people say you need to have a college degree now to be successful. And what I found over the years is that's absolutely not the case. And I want to make sure that we all understand that hands-on activities are critical to get kids engaged. And you can do a lot of training with kids through partnerships that you'll develop with local plumbing, welding, electricians, those type of things that'll come in. In fact, we had career days all the time as part of our programming where those particular people came in and we keep kids in school getting their education, but also understanding they can get in trade programs that they're going to be making pretty good incomes, and very good benefits. So I think it's a balance that you have to run there. And that's what the data I've provided tries to provide. Um, it's a matter of keeping track of it, and it's not that hard of a deal once you get it started. And you can see some of the graphs that I've developed over the years, and might be a helpful hint on how to get that started and maintain it.
Do you feel like it takes a single person to be head of partnerships, or is it something that you can delegate and disperse to staff?
The more hands and the more minds you have working on that, the more connections that you can make. And to be quite honest with you, I had such a good staff at Holmes Junior High who bought into the after school program. For example, my coordinator, Dan Bauer, who's still working with that, was outstanding. He had many connections in the community. We brought in Boys and Girls Club from the community who had many connections as well, the YMCA. Um, the more people you have working on that, the better you're going to be. Because I'll be honest, as a principal, I had many other duties. And even though after school was my passion, I couldn't spend all my time on just after school. So I needed to delegate some of those responsibilities to people I trusted, to people I knew who were engaged and excited about it. And that's what made our program successful.
So ensuring that you're empowering your staff to make those connections
Yeah, and
and
I
thinking outside the box probably about their connections.
actually, in fact, that's the key thing. And where we really began thinking outside the box was asking kids what their interests were.
Mhm.
That got us things that we never even would have realized, would be a motivating factor for kids. But I think the key to any successful operation is you delegate responsibilities to people on the bus who can handle those things. And I'm just, right now, I'm an advocate for it because I've seen what it can do. But I'm trying to bring in people through these other communities. For example, at Nevada that we're working at right now, Bondurant Farrar. I've had connections with the relationships with people that are in those programs through the educational process. And it's interesting because as I look at each of those, they all have teams in place to help deal with us. And those are the people we're working through and with. So
What do you say to people that are in communities and they say we just don't have partners? What do you say to that?
every community has the potential to have partners. What you've got to do, and that's one thing that we're doing now with the work that we're doing with our outreach here through the IAA, as we can come in and help you identify partners in your communities that may be good people to help get involved in these plans and these programs. And it's interesting when you sit down with the school personnel, you can give some suggestions, and right away, boom, it triggers some ideas of who they might have. Every community has churches, every community has some businesses, every community has schools, so that's a good starting point as you go through. But so many opportunities there that maybe go unnoticed, that maybe go untapped, that you need to work at. And one thing that I want to share that's critical here, many times local communities can be defensive that if you come in, you don't want to be saying we're here to supplant programming that you already have.
Mhm.
We're here to supplement it. And that's what the market study done by Campfire showed in central Iowa here, that there's such a tremendous need that these communities are not able to meet the need for after school programming and for the services that they provide. So again, we're there to supplement, not supplant what's going on. And that does relieve some of the anxiety from some of the programs that currently exist.
Yeah, one lesson that I take from this is being a resource to partners or potential partners. So
Hmm.
Campfire did the market research study. They already had that data that they approached the schools with.
Hmm.
They you go to partners and you present yourself as a resource. So I'm going to help you meet your mission.
Right.
Or I'm going to help you get to potential workers down the
Mm-hmm.
line.
Mm-hmm.
Or for community colleges, this is a new market,
Mm-hmm.
or this is how to reach those in your market
Right.
for your programs and
Mm-hmm.
services. So I think a big lesson from this is you need to approach potential partners as the resource for
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
And then also um, using your existing partners as spokespeople and using their networks to
Mm-hmm.
further reach out and say, these are our needs. This is what kids have said are our needs,
Mm-hmm.
because these are their interest areas. Let's spread that information out via all our networks.
Yeah, and you're so right there that, like I said earlier, the success to any operation is the relationship piece. And you've got to come in and develop some trust and some understanding. But the key factor here is the communities and the people involved are the ones that are going to be doing this. You're basically a resource, as you said, a guide to help direct that, and that's really the direction we've taken with our outreach operation here at IAA, and I've been really happy with it so far. I'd like to be able to expand further, but we're using this as kind of a pilot right now, and we're still in the engagement process here with these folks. They're trying to set up ways to use the programming opportunities Campfire can provide to supplement what they already have. So it's a process, but it's a fun process, and the best result is seeing the kids being successful. That's what we're all about. So,
Dave, one thing that you said was that partnerships change over time because
mhm,
kids' interests change.
right.
How do you say no to a partner?
Well, it's interesting because that usually comes through a mutual agreement, as things happen. Um, Sometimes it amounts to a business may not have the personnel to continue to help support where you're at, and we certainly understand that. Other times it may be that the interest from the kids level drops off and they realize that, so they change, and we have to go about change. So you have to be pretty flexible in that regard. But the key is always thanking people for what they're doing, regardless of whether you're sliding away from the opportunity or whether you're just heading into it full steam. You've got to be appreciative of the people that you're working with and thankful and transparency by communicating all the data that you have and the needs that you have.
Mhm.
That's a critical piece, I think. So,
Great.
mhm.
Well, I'll pause here and let our participants ask any questions that they might. Vic made a great point that the partnerships that Dave and his staff and school have developed over time allowed them to be sustainable after 21st century funding ended. Now, I think looking from the outside in, um, with Dave's program, um, what I've noticed is that Dave was a champion. So if you don't have a champion in your school, the risk of not sustaining is higher. So you need to get your principal on board and other members of staff at schools on board and get them bought in. They might only be providing space, maybe not funding right away, but if you can become that critical resource and that partner, your chances of sustaining are better.
Let me follow up on that just quickly. That point is such an important point. I'll never forget when my superintendent initially came to me with a plan of at 21st century after school programming. The first thought that went through my head is, oh no, not another program I'm going to have to administer. And I actually sat down, and I always try to be thorough in examining things. And I looked at the opportunity here, and I was a little bit hesitant to take it on initially. But once I read through the information and what it can do for kids, as a building principal, I got excited about it. And the thing that I talked to all of our schools going in, because even talking to Bob at Campfire, he said, we need to get to the superintendents. And I said, well, that's one option. But I said, we also need to get to the building principals, because if your principals don't understand the key concept here of what you're trying to do, you're not going to have the champion, quote unquote, or the person that's going to promote that program in the school setting. And the key to that whole thing is principals want their kids to be successful, not only because the kids are important to them, but because everything in education is measured on student achievement these days. And if you can find a way to improve student achievement through engagement and motivation through after school programming, there's no better way to get that mission accomplished than through that. And it's cost effective, it's a positive, and I think as a principal, you'd have to be not all there basically if you don't take advantage of something like that. So,
And for those that are on participating today and will access the recording, Dave is um, always responsive with email and other communications, and is usually willing to be a supportive voice for after school if your target is to reach a principal. So I would recommend, if you're struggling to get a principal on board, contact Dave and see if he'd be willing to offer resources or a voice. Um, we at the Iowa After School Alliance can also connect you, but I think that that point about getting your principal on board is really important. Even if you're not looking for space at the school or a full partnership, they're your referral agency a lot of times, and your connection to kids and families. So you want to be sure that you're making that connection, um, even post 21st century funding.
and I'll get back to the one advantage of being retired is having been around a lot of years, there are a lot of people that I know and have relationships with, and I'm just amazed when I go into school and do some research and backgrounds, how many of those people over the years I've actually worked with in some capacity. And that the relationship piece is critical in getting your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can be of help in that way, I'm more than happy to do that, especially. So,
Thanks, Dave.
yeah.
So one thing that I would like to lend to this conversation is the communications committee is actually working on a template to work with or contact people in the community, including those community partners, that can be altered to meet your specific needs for your specific sites. So that document is currently in development, but when it becomes public, we'll be glad to share that out across the network because it can be a nice introduction to a community partnership so that you can start to build that relationship then.
Mm-hmm.
So
Great.
That's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate your time. If you have any questions or you'd like to be connected to Dave, you can always contact myself, Michelle, at the Iowa After School Alliance, or Crystal. We're both available to take those questions on. We're excited to hear about the work of the committee as well that's linking to all of this information. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.